At just 14, Ethan's world shattered when his mother, a beacon of love and stability, died in a tragic accident. The grief was suffocating. He not only lost her physical presence but also felt abandoned by his father, who seemed to move on with unsettling speed. Barely 6 weeks after her death, Ethan's father wasn't just dating, he brought home a new woman, barely 14 years older than Ethan himself. This stepmother didn't tiptoe into their lives. She bulldozed through it, demanding Ethan call her mom. It wasn't just her words that stung, it was her actions. She tore down family photos, replaced furniture imbued with memories of his mother, and erased every trace of the woman who had defined Ethan's childhood. One fateful night, Ethan discovered her throwing away a box of his mother's belongings. Overcome with rage, he confronted her, shouting until his voice cracked. "You can't erase her." The argument escalated, leaving the house heavy with tension. For Ethan, it wasn't just about losing his mom, it was as if she was being systematically erased from existence. Every discarded photo, every changed piece of furniture, felt like another nail in the coffin of his past. His father stood silent, siding with his new wife, further isolating Ethan. Betrayal burned deep within him, fueling a quiet rebellion against this stranger trying to claim what wasn't hers. Ethan's resistance against his father's new wife was fierce and unyielding, fueled by a deep sense of betrayal and loss. The breaking point came on his 16th birthday, which should have been a celebration but turned into a battlefield. His stepmother determined to solidify her role as mother threw an extravagant party without consulting him. She stood in front of his friends, beaming with forced warmth, and declared it a gift from both your dad and me, your mom. Those words ignited a firestorm within Ethan. In a fit of rage, he grabbed the elaborately decorated cake she had bought and hurled it at the wall, screaming, "You are not my mother." The room fell silent, save for the sound of icing dripping down the wallpaper. Without another word, Ethan stormed out of the house, leaving behind stunned guests and a shattered atmosphere. For 3 days, no one knew where he went. He stayed hidden, wandering aimlessly, until his father threatened to file a missing person report. The tension between Ethan and his family wasn't just limited to dramatic outbursts, it permeated every corner of their lives. Meals became unbearable rituals of silence or explosive arguments. Every bite of food felt like swallowing shards of glass. His father would glare at him during dinner, muttering under his breath about how Ethan was being disrespectful and ungrateful. Meanwhile, his stepmother persisted in her relentless campaign to erase any trace of Ethan's real mother. Photographs were removed from walls, personal belongings disappeared overnight, and even the scent of his mother's favorite perfume, a lingering memory in the air, was replaced by the sterile smell of cleaning products. One night, unable to bear the thought of losing the last remnants of his mother, Ethan stayed awake until dawn, sneaking through the house like a thief in his own home. He rummaged through forgotten boxes in the attic, rescuing what little remained: faded photographs, handwritten letters, and a locket that once belonged to her. With trembling hands, he carried these treasures to the basement, where he had discovered a small crawl space beneath loose floorboards. There, in the damp darkness, he hid them, vowing never to let anyone destroy them. To mark his defiance, he carved his mother's name into the wooden beams of his bedroom ceiling, ensuring she would always have a place in his life even if no one else acknowledged her. Despite Ethan's efforts to preserve his mother's memory, the emotional toll weighed heavily on him. He felt increasingly isolated, caught between his father's anger and his stepmother's manipulative attempts to win him over. Conversations with either adult were rare, and when they did occur, they often devolved into shouting matches. Once, after refusing to call his stepmother mom, Ethan endured a lecture from his father about respect and family unity. "If you can't accept her, you're not part of this family," his father snapped, slamming the door shut behind him. Ethan sat alone in his room, staring at the carving of his mother's name, wondering if he truly belonged anywhere anymore. The strain reached its peak when Ethan stopped speaking altogether unless absolutely necessary. When addressed directly, his responses were clipped, monosyllabic answers designed to end conversations quickly. His stepmother grew frustrated, accusing him of being cold and unapproachable. "Why do you hate me so much?" she demanded one evening, tears streaming down her face. Ethan simply replied, "Because you're trying to replace someone irreplaceable." From then on, communication dwindled to near non-existence. The household became a pressure cooker of unresolved emotions, waiting for something or someone to crack. The moment Ethan turned 18, he walked out of his father's house without looking back. It wasn't just a physical departure, it was an escape from the suffocating weight of years spent under the shadow of betrayal and erasure. He chose a university in a distant city, one where no one knew about his fractured family or the scars that ran deep beneath his quiet exterior. For the first time in 4 years, Ethan felt like he could breathe. Leaving behind the oppressive presence of his father and stepmother felt like breaking free from a prison, a mental and emotional cage they had built around him. But even as he relished this newfound freedom, the ghosts of his past lingered. Surviving on his own proved harder than Ethan anticipated. Between grueling classes, sleepless nights studying, and juggling multiple part-time jobs, every day was a battle. He worked long hours washing dishes at a crowded restaurant, scrubbing plates until his hands were raw. On weekends, he tutored struggling students, pouring what little energy he had left into helping others while barely keeping himself afloat. The loneliness gnawed at him constantly. There were days when he sat alone in his cramped dorm room, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if anyone truly understood the pain he carried. But it wasn't just the exhaustion or isolation that haunted him, it was the dreams. Night after night, Ethan would wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, after dreaming of his mother. In one particularly vivid nightmare, she stood before him, calling his name softly, her voice echoing through an endless void. "Ethan," she whispered, reaching out with trembling hands. He tried to run toward her, but an invisible force held him back. When he finally woke, tears streaming down his face, he realized something crucial. Forgetting her wasn't an option, not now, not ever. That night, he vowed to keep her memory alive, no matter how painful it became. Despite the hardships, Ethan refused to let his circumstances break him. Every paycheck he earned, every late-night study session, every conversation with strangers who didn't know his story, all of it reinforced his determination to build a life completely separate from his father and stepmother. Yet, cutting ties wasn't as simple as moving away. His stepmother occasionally tried contacting him via email or phone calls, each message filled with thinly veiled guilt trips about family unity and forgiveness. Ethan deleted them unread, unwilling to give her any power over his emotions. Meanwhile, his father remained silent, neither apologizing nor acknowledging the rift between them. This silence spoke louder than words. It confirmed Ethan's belief that their relationship was beyond repair. By the time Ethan graduated, he had transformed himself into someone stronger, more resilient. But the wound still throbbed beneath the surface. There were moments when he allowed himself to imagine reconciliation, only to remember the look on his stepmother's face during their last confrontation, the smug certainty that she could replace his mother. Those memories hardened his resolve. Whatever connection he once had with his father's world was gone forever, buried alongside his childhood innocence. And though the road ahead seemed uncertain, Ethan clung to one truth: surviving meant honoring his mother's legacy, not forgetting it. Ethan thought he had finally found peace when he married a woman who truly understood him, a partner who stood by his side and respected the scars of his past. For a while, life seemed stable, but stability was an illusion. One day, Ethan's father and stepmother somehow uncovered his address through a family member, shattering the fragile barrier Ethan had built between them and his new life. Their intrusion felt like a violation, a deliberate disregard for the boundaries Ethan had spent years reinforcing. The first sign of their interference came in the form of a social media post from his stepmother. She gleefully announced that she couldn't wait to become a grandmother, tagging photos of Ethan and his wife with captions like, "So proud of my son and daughter-in-law." It was as if she believed her words could rewrite reality, erasing the fact that Ethan had never acknowledged her as family. Furious, Ethan responded publicly, stating in no uncertain terms, "She is not my mother, and she will never be the grandmother of my children." The comment section exploded with reactions, turning what should have been a private matter into a public spectacle. Tensions escalated further when Ethan received a letter from his father, a venomous tirade accusing him of being selfish, disrespectful, and tarnishing the family name. "You've embarrassed us," his father wrote, "and you're ruining any chance we have at rebuilding this family." The audacity of the accusation left Ethan seething. He hadn't asked for their presence in his life. They had forced themselves into it, disregarding every ounce of pain they had caused him. How dare they frame him as the villain? The breaking point came during an ordinary trip to the supermarket. Ethan and his wife were picking out groceries when they spotted his father and stepmother lingering near the checkout line. At first, Ethan froze, unsure whether to confront them or leave immediately. But then his stepmother approached, smiling widely as though nothing was wrong. "Oh, look who it is," she exclaimed, loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "Our son and his lovely wife." Ethan's blood boiled. Before he could stop himself, he snapped, "I'm not your son." His voice carried across the store, drawing stares from other customers. His wife placed a calming hand on his arm, but the damage was done. The confrontation turned heated as his stepmother insisted, "You'll always be my son, Ethan, whether you like it or not." Her tone dripped with condescension, as if she believed persistence would eventually wear him down. Meanwhile, his father stood silently, avoiding eye contact, leaving Ethan feeling more abandoned than ever. The scene grew increasingly chaotic as voices rose and accusations flew. A store employee intervened, asking them to lower their voices or leave. Ethan clenched his fists, resisting the urge to say something he might regret. Instead, he grabbed his cart and stormed out, his wife following closely behind. As they drove home in tense silence, Ethan replayed the incident in his mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. Why couldn't they just let him go? Why did they insist on inserting themselves into a life they clearly didn't belong to? Back at home, Ethan sat alone in his study, staring at the walls covered in photos of his wife and unborn child, the future he was building, free from the shadows of his past. Yet, those shadows loomed larger than ever. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from the ongoing social media fallout. Strangers weighed in on his personal life, some defending him, others siding with his father and stepmother. It felt surreal, like his entire existence had become a battleground for opinions he neither sought nor wanted. Despite the chaos, one thing became crystal clear: Ethan's resolve hardened. He wouldn't allow them to dictate the narrative of his life. They could move closer, post online, or even show up uninvited, but they would never break him. Every attempt to intrude only fueled his determination to protect the family he was creating, a family untainted by their toxicity. Ethan's worst nightmare came true when his father and stepmother moved into a house just 5 minutes away from his family home. It was as if they were deliberately planting themselves in his life, refusing to let him escape the past he had worked so hard to bury. The proximity was suffocating. Ethan could no longer shake the feeling that they were watching him, waiting for an opportunity to insert themselves into his world. He became hypervigilant, installing a state-of-the-art security system complete with motion sensors, doorbell cameras, and even floodlights around the property. Yet, despite these precautions, the psychological toll was immense. Every creak of the floorboards at night, every car passing by too slowly, sent his heart racing. Their presence quickly escalated from unsettling to invasive. Ethan and his wife began noticing them everywhere: at the grocery store, the park, even the local coffee shop. It felt orchestrated, like they were deliberately positioning themselves in places Ethan frequented. One afternoon, while Ethan and his wife were casually strolling through the supermarket, they spotted his father and stepmother standing in line at the checkout counter behind them. At first, Ethan froze, unsure whether to confront them or leave immediately. But then his stepmother approached, smiling widely as though nothing was wrong. "Oh, look who it is," she exclaimed loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "Our son and his lovely wife. I can't wait to meet our grandchild, she'd be adorable." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. His fists clenched involuntarily as anger surged through him. Before he could stop himself, he snapped back, "You're not my mother, and you'll never be a grandmother to my child." Voices rose as the confrontation turned heated. His stepmother insisted, "You'll always be my son, Ethan," her tone dripping with condescension. Meanwhile, his father stood silently, avoiding eye contact, leaving Ethan feeling more abandoned than ever. Shoppers stopped browsing to watch the spectacle unfold, some whispering among themselves, others openly staring. A store employee eventually intervened, asking them to lower their voices or leave. Ethan grabbed his cart and stormed out, his wife following closely behind, trying to calm him down. But the harassment didn't stop there. One night, as Ethan sat alone in his study reviewing baby-proofing plans, he glanced at the live feed from his security camera. To his horror, he saw two figures lingering near his front gate. It was his father and stepmother. Panic surged through him as he rushed outside, phone in hand, ready to call the police. By the time he reached the driveway, they were already walking away, disappearing into the darkness. When questioned later, law enforcement explained that unless there was evidence of trespassing or explicit threats, there was little they could do. "They haven't broken any laws," the officer said dismissively. The helplessness overwhelmed Ethan. How could the law protect him when their actions felt like a slow, calculated invasion? The constant appearances left Ethan perpetually on edge. He started avoiding public spaces altogether, unwilling to risk another encounter. His wife noticed the strain etched into his face, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders perpetually tense, and tried her best to support him emotionally. Yet, even within the supposed safety of their home, Ethan couldn't relax. Every knock on the door made him jump. Every unfamiliar car parked nearby sent his mind spiraling into paranoia. The weight of their intrusion pressed down on him, suffocating his ability to focus on preparing for fatherhood. At one point, Ethan's therapist encouraged him to confront his fears head-on, suggesting he write a letter detailing exactly how their behavior affected him. But Ethan knew it wouldn't change anything. They weren't going to stop, not unless forced by something stronger than words. So, he doubled down on protecting his family, teaching his pregnant wife how to use the security system and devising contingency plans in case of emergencies. Still, the question lingered in his mind. How far would they go? And what would it take to make them leave him alone for good? Ethan's breaking point came when he realized that his father and stepmother would never respect the boundaries he had set. Their relentless intrusion into his life, showing up uninvited, moving closer to his home, and attempting to insert themselves into his family, left him with no choice but to take drastic action. He hired a lawyer, determined to formalize his demand for complete separation through an official letter. The document was nothing short of a manifesto, 10 pages detailing every painful violation they had committed over the years. From erasing his mother's memory to their constant attempts at manipulation, Ethan left no stone unturned. Sitting alone in his study one night, Ethan read the letter aloud to himself before sending it off. His voice trembled with anger as he recounted how they had discarded his mother's belongings, forced him to call his stepmother mom, and even moved within 5 minutes of his home after years of silence. Each sentence felt like reliving a wound that had never healed. Tears welled up in his eyes as he reached the final paragraph, a stern warning that any breach of the terms outlined in the letter would result in legal consequences. It wasn't just a letter, it was a declaration of independence from a toxic past. To ensure there could be no misunderstanding, Ethan worked closely with his lawyer to include specific clauses. They were forbidden from contacting him or his wife directly under any circumstances unless routed through their attorney. They were barred from attending family events, visiting their home, or appearing near schools, daycare centers, or public gatherings where Ethan's family might be present. The rules were clear: act as though they didn't exist. Violating these terms would trigger immediate legal action. The delivery of the letter was orchestrated with calculated precision. A private courier service hand-delivered the document to Ethan's father and stepmother, accompanied by video evidence of the transaction. The package included signed copies for their records and a notarized statement affirming its legality. When Ethan watched the footage later, he saw the shock on their faces as they opened the envelope. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of control, a sense that he was finally taking back power over his own life. But the process wasn't easy. Writing the letter forced Ethan to confront years of suppressed pain and resentment. At times, he had to pause mid-sentence, overwhelmed by memories of his mother and the life he had lost. Yet, each word he wrote strengthened his resolve. He knew this was more than just protecting himself, it was about safeguarding the future of his unborn child. As he sealed the envelope and handed it over to the courier, Ethan whispered to himself, "This ends now." Though the battle was far from over, he took solace in knowing he had drawn a line in the sand, one they dared not cross. Desperate to escape the relentless intrusion of his father and stepmother, Ethan made the difficult decision to uproot his family and move to a secluded home deep in the woods. The new house, surrounded by towering trees and miles of isolation, offered a fragile sense of safety. To fortify their sanctuary, Ethan invested in a state-of-the-art security system, motion sensors, infrared cameras, and even floodlights that illuminated every inch of the property. Yet, despite these precautions, the shadows of his past lingered like an uncheckable curse. One night, as Ethan lay awake listening to the eerie silence of the forest, a faint noise outside jolted him from his thoughts. His heart raced as he grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the window. Was it them? Had they followed him even here? The thought sent a chill down his spine. He scanned the darkness, finding nothing but swaying branches and rustling leaves. Still, the paranoia clung to him, whispering that no place was truly safe. Earlier that week, Ethan and his wife had sat together at the kitchen table, discussing the move with quiet determination. "We can't let them near our child," Ethan said, his voice trembling with emotion. His wife nodded, placing a reassuring hand on his. "We'll do whatever it takes," she replied firmly. Their unborn child represented hope, a chance to build a future tainted by the toxic remnants of Ethan's past. But the weight of protecting that future pressed heavily on his shoulders. Even in their remote location, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. During rare trips into town, he would spot his father or stepmother lingering in the distance, their presence deliberate and unsettling. Each encounter reignited the fear that no matter how far they ran, the ghosts of his childhood would always find him. Yet, Ethan refused to surrender. He vowed to shield his family at all costs, even if it meant living under constant vigilance. The phone call came unexpectedly, a lawyer contacting Ethan on behalf of his father. The message was brief but heavy. His father was gravely ill, diagnosed with a terminal condition, and had only 2 years left to live at most. He wanted one final chance to repair their relationship. Ethan froze as the words sank in, torn between anger and a flicker of guilt. Should he meet him? Could he forgive the man who had abandoned him emotionally after his mother's death? For days, Ethan wrestled with these questions, replaying memories of his childhood, the silence at dinner tables, the forced introductions to his stepmother, and the erasure of his mother's memory. Each recollection hardened his resolve, yet curiosity lingered. The meeting took place in a quiet coffee shop chosen for its neutrality. Ethan arrived early, his wife by his side, her presence grounding him. His father and stepmother were already seated when they walked in. Ethan felt an immediate pang of irritation when he saw them, his father frail but still recognizable, his stepmother clutching a handbag tightly, her eyes scanning the room nervously. They exchanged awkward pleasantries before diving into the reason for the meeting. His father began slowly, detailing his declining health with scans and doctor's notes spread across the table like evidence in a trial. "I don't have much time," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "All I want is to make things right." Ethan listened in stony silence, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. When his father finished, there was a long pause, filled only with the faint hum of background conversations. Then Ethan stood up, his chair scraping sharply against the floor. He looked directly into his father's eyes, his own blazing with years of pent-up fury. "You stopped being my father the day Mom died," he said, his voice low but cutting. "I owe you nothing." His stepmother gasped, leaning forward to interject, but Ethan cut her off before she could speak. Years of suppressed pain erupted like a dam breaking. He recounted every betrayal, every act of erasure, every moment he'd felt abandoned or manipulated. "You tried to erase her," he shouted, pointing at his stepmother. "You acted like she never existed. And you?" He turned back to his father, his voice rising. "You chose her over your own son. You let her throw away everything that reminded me of Mom. You didn't care about me, you cared about pretending everything was fine while I fell apart." The cafe fell silent around them, other patrons glancing nervously at the unfolding scene. His stepmother opened her mouth again, but no words came out. His father sat motionless, staring down at the table, his face pale and drawn. For the first time, Ethan saw not a figure of authority or resentment but a broken man. Yet, it wasn't enough to soften him. As far as Ethan was concerned, this man had forfeited any claim to his love or forgiveness long ago. When Ethan finally turned to leave, his wife gently tugged his arm, guiding him toward the exit. Behind them, his father and stepmother remained frozen in stunned silence, the weight of Ethan's words hanging heavily in the air. Outside, Ethan leaned against the car, struggling to catch his breath. His wife wrapped her arms around him, whispering reassurances, but inside, Ethan knew this confrontation would haunt him for weeks to come. Forgiveness wasn't something he could offer, not now, maybe not ever. After the explosive confrontation with his father and stepmother, Ethan noticed a shift. They seemed to retreat, at least temporarily. Their absence allowed him to focus on what truly mattered, his wife and newborn child. Yet, the shadows of his past refused to fade entirely. Night after night, Ethan was haunted by vivid dreams of his mother, her voice calling out to him, her presence lingering just beyond reach. These nightmares left him drenched in sweat and filled with an overwhelming sense of loss. During the day, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, as if his father and stepmother were still lurking somewhere in the periphery of his life. To cope, Ethan leaned heavily on therapy. His new therapist encouraged him to confront his pain head-on, helping him untangle years of suppressed emotions. Through sessions filled with raw honesty, Ethan began to unpack the trauma of losing his mother, the betrayal by his father, and the relentless intrusion of his stepmother. It wasn't easy. There were moments when he broke down completely, but each session brought a glimmer of clarity. He realized that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning how to carry his scars without letting them define him. His family became his anchor. Every time doubt crept in or fear threatened to overwhelm him, his wife stood firmly by his side, offering words of comfort and unwavering support. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, fortified by shared resilience. But it was their child, a tiny bundle of innocence and joy, who truly transformed Ethan's perspective. One evening, as he cradled his sleeping baby in his arms, Ethan felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly brought him to tears. For the first time in years, he understood what it meant to protect something so precious. Looking down at his child's peaceful face, he vowed to shield them from the toxicity that had poisoned his own childhood. Despite these moments of hope, Ethan knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. The wounds ran deep, and old fears occasionally resurfaced. Once, while walking through the park with his family, he spotted someone who resembled his father in the distance. Panic gripped him instantly, but his wife gently squeezed his hand, grounding him. "We're safe," she whispered. Her calm reassurance reminded him that he wasn't alone anymore. He had a team of two fighting alongside him. As weeks turned into months, Ethan slowly began to find peace. The nightmares lessened, replaced by memories of happier times with his mother. Though the scars remained, they no longer consumed him. Instead, they served as reminders of where he came from and why he fought so hard to build a better future. Holding his child close one night, Ethan whispered, "I'll never let anyone take this away from us." In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of his family, he finally believed it.